All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get going and have some welcoming and introductory comments, and that'll give us an opportunity for a few more people to come in, and we want to make sure Scott and Michigan State have their full complement of time. So first, Greg Cuomo from the University of Minnesota, Deputy Director in the Experiment Station and Associate Dean, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the second of our 2 Zoom calls featuring presentations from our North Central colleagues who are interested in serving as the host institution for the North Central Region Center for Rural Development for the next 5 years. In March and April, our region requested proposals from institutions. We received 2 applications, one from Michigan State University and one from Purdue University. Michigan State will be presenting in just a few minutes. In preparation for this call, everyone should have received both the proposal and a copy of the RFP, and if not, please let us know in the chat box and we'll be sure to send you one immediately. I do want to remind people that this is being recorded and will be posted with the first call by the close of business today. We've also appointed a technical review committee, and its members are also on the call today. The role of the technical review committee is to closely look at proposals, provide an assessment of strengths and weaknesses, and a ranking of the 2 proposals to the executive committee of the NCRA and the NCCEA. I want to thank the committee chair, Dan Rossi, and all the members who include Dan's chair. He's a former executive director of the Northeastern Regional Association of State Agricultural Experiment Station Directors. And the more you work here, the easier it is to say that, which is the ERA, and is at Rutgers University. Marty Draper, Associate Dean of Research in the College of Agriculture at Kansas State University. Carla Trotman, Extension Director, South Dakota State. Roberta Ripatella, Associate Dean for Outreach and Engagement at Oregon State University, and Lynette Flaggy, Assistant Director, Family and Community Wellness at North Dakota State University. Our format for this call is to have the proposal's primary leader or leadership team review their proposal. We've asked the presenters to give a 20 to 30-minute overview, and that will be followed by questions from all of us. We ask the deans and directors offer their questions during that time period, and we anticipate this initial question and answer period will last about 30 minutes. At the beginning of the next hour, we'll turn the review this over to the technical review committee for their discussions. Not everyone could participate today, so the Zoom call is recorded, as I said, and will be offered for viewing that by those on today's call. Again, deans and directors are asked to submit their comments in the, We're asking deans and directors to submit their comments via Qualtrics, and I saw that Robin put a link to that in the chat box already if you're looking for that. And the comments will be kept confidential. They'll be received by the Joint Executive Committee of the NCRA and the NCCEA, as the 2 executive committees have the final responsibility to select the host institution. And we hope to have that decision by mid-June. Are there any questions on the processes? All right, so our presenter today is Dr. Scott Loveridge. He's the interim director of the School of Planning, Design, and Construction and the interim chair of the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University. Scott?
Well, thanks. Yeah, the interim director of the school is, that was a couple of years ago, but I'm just running 1 unit now. But thanks for taking a little time today. I know that it's a busy time with everybody having to adjust with the coronavirus situation, and of course the events of the troubling events of the last couple of weeks. So I do appreciate people taking time out of their day today. I'm going to cover really 4 things today. First, some background on myself, how I came to be who I am and why I'm interested in this, and then my prior experiences with the center, what I've been doing the last 4 years, and then a look ahead of what might be going on in the center if I'm leading it. So, you know, I don't really talk about myself a lot. I'm not a big ego person, but in this situation, I think it's a good idea to cover some of those things. I was born and raised in Michigan, and I spent my summers on Grand Farm, and I came to love rural people and rural areas and the outdoors, and that led to a BA in biology, where I did my senior thesis on cell migration and chicken embryos. So for a little while there, I was a poultry scientist, even though I probably didn't know the term at the time. After I finished my undergrad degree, I went into the Peace Corps and I became an extension agent, working with farmers and what is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that was sort of my first introduction to serving as an extension person. That led to my interest in agricultural economics. So I got a PhD at Michigan State University. And then from there, I took my first faculty job as an assistant professor in community development policy at the University of Minnesota, the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics. And this was a 50% research, 50% extension position. And I've sort of followed that pattern in my work from there onwards of kind of a 50, fixed research and extension type work. The department was hosting a Bush Fellows program at the time, which brought extension educators from the field for about a year to learn about community economics. So there's a team of 3 faculty that worked with those educators on a regular basis, and it was a great introduction to me to the U.S. extension system and what educators need from people on campus and kind of bridging that campus field divide. So it was really a wonderful experience and helped me kind of develop good instincts for both sides of that question. That was also where I first started interacting with the regional rural development centers. We had a small grant from our central center, but also used a lot of the materials that came out of the other 3 centers, in particular the Western Center, which seemed to have a lot of good material that was appropriate for the programs I was developing there. As I got further into community economics, regional economics, I was noticing that West Virginia University really had a center for that, stood out for its work in rural policy and spatial econometrics. So again, kind of the more applied and the more esoteric components of that. So I applied to lead a new unit that was focused on community development in the extension service there, and introduced a lot of fun programs. In that role, the community design team, the First Impressions program that was borrowed from Wisconsin, started a new state and local public finance program. They had a business retention and expansion program there that was there already, and I strengthened that. And in doing that, I noticed that there was probably a need for a good manual on how to do that type of program. And so I partnered with the Northeast Center for Rural Development to develop kind of a guidebook for different people that are different components of the program. And that went on to become their bestseller for many, many years thereafter. Extension in West Virginia reorganized, and so I was asked to lead a much larger unit. So this is 40 people, and it encompassed labor studies, occupational health and safety, firefighter training, as well as 6 field staff. And so I was having fun learning about those people and those programs, and suddenly the directorship of the Regional Research Institute became vacant. The Regional Research Institute was really my reason for being interested in West Virginia in the first place, so I applied to become its director. This is an endowed research institute with linkages to faculty in economics, geography, sociology, agricultural economics, public administration, and law. And as the director of the institute, I greatly expanded the grant activity. I also implemented an NSF research experiences for undergraduate program and taught in the economics department PhD field course in regional economics. And at the same time, I was creating a new publication called the Web Book of Regional Science, and that has become the most frequently accessed resource in regional economics in the world. So it's successive directors have continued to add to that, and it's really been an asset to the RRI. But I got a phone call from Michigan State University wanting to know if I could apply to become state lead for extension, community development, and natural resource programs. This was an opportunity to go home. I'm a Midwestern boy, and also to be part of an amazing institution that I really have a lot of respect for. And frankly, on the personal side, I was feeling like it would be a great way for my kids to get to know their grandparents better. So So I went for that, started doing that, and a couple of years into that, my department chair asked me to become associate chair. So I took that on as an additional assignment. It's mostly focused on the graduate program, where I implemented strategies to that reverse the long-term decline in the graduate enrollment, at the same time increasing the GRE scores of the students who matriculated. I was asked to, due to my extension role, to be a member of the NCR CRD board. And I had just completed that term when Neil Flora announced that she was stepping down as director. So I was the one of two people that led the MSU bid to host the center at Michigan State University. So my time there as director of the NCR CRD, I launched that with a 12-state needs assessment where I visited every 1862 in the region. At the time, there was only one 1890, so I visited Lincoln University, and also about half of the 1994s in the region. I also took time to visit field staff in their home counties. I thought it was really important, given my earlier experience, to understand both sides of the equation, both of these major stakeholders, the folks on campus and the folks in the field. So just kind of learning what's going on in their world and how they view things and the resources that they need. I also had extensive discussions with the board and the other RRDCs and agency folks, and all that work produced really three themes for the center's work. One was economic development. Second one was technology transfer and innovation in agriculture. And the third one was rural health systems. And then kind of thinking about the four centers and realized that I had a working relationship with all three of the directors already through prior work, and so I felt like we could be a good team. So I proposed to them that they were meeting, but they weren't really doing projects together. It's just quarterly conference call. Hi, how you doing? How are budgets? Blah blah blah. But they weren't really implementing much as a team. So I proposed that we construct what I call the four-center one-stop shop model to market the centers to national agencies as a place to partner with the entire land grant system. The idea is that we would rotate leadership for the different projects, but that each center would contribute to each project. And the other idea is, of course, that we would then cascade those resources down to the states that we serve. So through sub-awards and resources that we develop centrally. The implementation took place in the form of quarterly meetings. So moving away from the conference call to meetings, and these were wonderfully facilitated by Brent Elrod, who is just a wonderful partner for us in the centers, and kind of introducing us to partners and helping us think about USDA roles that we could play, but also other agencies. MSU has a DC office, which was really handy because that made our meetings much more efficient. We could see a lot of people just being there in one place and having them come to us. I also said, hey, let's start meeting with our congressional delegations. Michigan is got Senator Stabenow here. She's one of the two leads for the Farm Bill, and so we had some interaction around that. But continually, a couple times a year, would go in and talk to the legislative assistants about rural development issues, what the centers are doing, what we're hearing from our stakeholders about rural issues. It was also a good time to coordinate with SCOP, ECOP, and CARET meetings. So we were going to those, and really, I really appreciated meeting the colleagues through that, and also the CARE reps, who are just amazing people. We just find really committed people that really love the land grant system, that are willing to take their time out to do that work for us. The other thing I did, kind of service-wise, was volunteer to chair an AFRI competitive grants panel. I thought that would position me better to advise people in the 12 states about how to do good proposals for that competition. So the 4-center model, it really worked quite well. If you look at the proposal, you'll see that, we, in very short order, we had 7 projects that we were able to launch, and all of these were, funneling money and resources to, our stakeholder states from around the region. I think one of mine that I led had 15 sub-awards to land-grant universities in it. And so, millions of dollars flowed back to our partners through this very effective strategy. So some other things that I did was certainly networking in the region. I was an active participant in the Community Development Extension Program Leaders meetings. And one of those meetings, we were brainstorming about metrics and came up with a set of common indicators that everybody could accept, and the center played a role in kind of assembling those and putting together an annual impacts report, which I can tell you was extremely popular in DC. The policymakers and the leaders of USDA just ate that up. They loved it. So it's a good example of how to communicate your impacts, and it's truly amazing what the system does. Thousands of people have their lives improved by the work that happens through the system. I was always happy to serve as a reviewer for faculty and educator promotion packages. It helped me get to know what was going on in that state and what the standards were. So I was happy to do that. The service as the AFRI panel manager helped me get even better at USDA competitive grants, and I've also got grants from HUD and NSF. So it was helping others kind of improve their granting skills and finding them partners for proposals. Due to the health theme of the center, I also started attending Family and Consumer Science program leader meetings for extension and going to both the community development extension conferences and the health-related extension conferences. On the research side, I was active in the North American Regional Science Council. This is kind of the go-to place for research that relates to the topics that centers tend to worry about, and also supported the Mid-Continent Regional Science Association by funding graduate students to present their work. Land-grant graduate students from the region to present their work there. I also enjoyed showcasing the region's work. At the time, webinars were a new technology, so I was an early adopter. I think I was one of the first people to start offering national webinars, and certainly the first one to offer them that related to community and rural development. And so those were quite popular and got the word out about what different states were doing to help people network. Later, I instituted a parallel series on land-grant innovations in agriculture. And the idea behind this series is to connect faculty inventors in the biophysical ag space to end users and investors. And John Mann has done a really nice job of leading this. It's really produced some good matches. One of my favorites is the poultry guy that got connected to an aquaculture company several states away. You don't think of poultry and aquaculture having much to do but with each other, but the vaccine delivery system that the person was working on worked for fish as well as chickens. So I guess the poultry science thing came back again to me. I also enjoy working with the board. As a former member of the board, I had a pretty good sense of what the board wanted to see and what they didn't want to see. So I reduced the unloved items and focused on the items that were more germane. Being mindful of people's time, I was able to reduce the meeting time, which I'm sure the members appreciated. Also kind of made the travel more convenient by meeting in hubs. At the time, we had a couple members from Minnesota, so we went to Minneapolis several times. We also met in Detroit. We met in DC, so people could coordinate with other DC-based business that they had to do. Another thing that I did was reach out to the First American Land Grant Consortium. This is an umbrella organization for all of the 1994 institutions. So I would participate in their meetings, their annual conference, gave seminars on grant writing and to help kind of build their capacity in grant writing. And then when I had ideas for how I wanted to connect, I'd always reach out to John Phillips, with whom I have a great relationship. He's the executive director of the group for networking to particular, on particular topics that I thought the 1994s might be interested in. Greg mentioned the NCCEA and the NCRA, great groups. I routinely went to the meetings of these groups to kind of understand the issues that they're facing. So, if there's a way to move the center's work towards those needs, I was always happy to do that. It was always also a great way to sort of help people understand what the center was doing, so that when we needed to refresh the board as terms ended, there were people that knew the work and were willing to engage. And so that was also a benefit of that. So a summary of the center under my leadership, it was well connected to its board and the major stakeholder groups. It championed a new model, the four-center model, the four-center one-stop shop model that resulted in many new national projects and partnerships with states from around the region and the nation. The center was seen as a place for newer hires to get some external mentoring, and for more senior people to renew themselves. And the center was helping many land grant professionals expand their grant portfolios and networks, and all with the goal of making a difference on the ground. So in the last 4 years, what have I done? I had a sabbatical, first sabbatical in my career, where I developed some technical skills, but I also helped out the center with some, there were a lot of projects underway when I left, and it was a lot for a new person to handle. So I was kind of backstopping Mark Skidmore and getting those projects executed. And I also took time out to do a fun project where I interviewed all of the community development program leaders in the region to learn about their most popular programs. And the idea was to, and then shared that result back to the program leaders. But the idea was to cross-pollinate across states, and also maybe to develop some contracts going back and forth so that people didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and also kind of get an understanding of what tends to work. What are the common elements across the 45 programs or so that I looked at for program design. So I was just finishing the sabbatical, and I was tapped to become the interim director of the MSU School of Planning, Design, and Construction. This is a 45-person academic unit that delivers 4 undergraduate majors and 3 graduate degrees. Planning is part of that, and since community development and planning go together pretty well, I was interested in learning more about the academic side of the house in that arena, so I was glad to do it. About 6 months in, they were asking me to apply for the permanent position, but I declined. Wanted to get back to my roots a bit. Didn't do that. 3 weeks into my return to the department, I was asked by the dean to take over as on an interim basis, the MSU Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. This is a 50-member faculty with 100 graduate students and 15 postdocs. The grant portfolio is about $10 million annually. There's a lot of relationships with agencies where they fund tenure system faculty into the department. And I was sort of parachuted in at a contentious moment and asked to sort of, kind of bring people back together again and prepare the department for a permanent chair search. And so we've been doing that, and the search is about to get underway here shortly. So I think these positions the last 4 years really have positioned me to better understand the perspectives of the academic unit leaders as I advise and mentor land grant personnel in the CRD role. So moving forward, what's the NCR CRD going to look like if I were to take it over? Well, there's the mission. I wrote the mission 10 years ago. I don't think it's changed much. I mean, we could talk about that, but I still see the mission as to engage extension professionals, researchers, and their partners to enhance rural development outcomes in the 12-state North Central region. I think that's a good mission. Again, we can revisit it, but that's, I think it's pretty solid still. And my vision for that is that the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development will be viewed as a valued partner by all of the land-grant institutions in the region, the other 3 rural development centers, USDA, other national agencies, foundations and nonprofits with rural development interests, and policymakers. So what are some strategies to accomplish this? Well, I think it's been a long time since that initial needs assessment, and I would want to repeat that. You know, it's about more than just talking to land-grant employees. It's really going out and talking to people along the way, going out in the field, seeing what's happening in Main Street, you know, just talking to people and observing. Now we're in a weird time, so I don't know if I would be able to do the travel associated with that immediately. So I might start with some virtual interactions. I've had great success with the Fisheries and Wildlife Department of completing a strategic plan, all virtually, these last few months with, you know, the full faculty really engaged in that process. There's lots of techniques that we've picked up along the way that could be applied to this question. Another thing that I would do is to strengthen the 4-center one-stop shop model. It feels like that has maybe slipped a bit in the last 5 years. I'd like to bring it back stronger so I can enhance partnerships with regional stakeholders and national agencies. So what are some of the tactics I would want to use? I've been having fun experimenting a bit with fast pitch sessions, virtual fast pitch sessions where we identify a topic and then invite people to meet each other and do fast pitches about what they're interested in doing to get some collaborations going. I talked a bit about mentorship in the first iteration as NCR CRD director. I think maybe a more formalized approach might be fun to try this time based on everything that I've learned and seen, where we put people through a more formal process of mentoring that would be available to early stage people in their land grant careers. Part of that could be grant and curriculum writing workshops, but also just kind of how do you frame your program, how do you develop yourself, and then connecting them with other people from around the region. I mentioned a bit the webinars. That's become a very popular medium. There's a lot of competition out there, and so it might be time to, you know, relook at how the center does its webinars and move to a more polished, produced version of the webinars. Maybe we continue to have these freewheeling webinars, and then take the best of those and really work with the presenter and present and develop a much more produced version for broader distribution and more publicity around it. And I think too, podcasts have been around for a little while, but the thing that's different now is that almost everybody can use them, you know, in their car, as they're walking around, as they're driving the tractor or whatever. And so, you know, maybe we can start to also showcase what's going on from the land grants through podcast. And fortunately, John Mann, who was, you know, in the proposal with me, has a lot of experience in broadcast media. He worked for a TV station for 10 years before starting his PhD. So he's got that background. He really understands how that sector works. So I think he'll be a great partner in pursuing that strategy. So I said that we needed to do a needs assessment to identify topics and priorities. And I still believe that, but, you know, there might be a few things that could come out of that needs assessment just looking across the landscape. And one would be, you know, how do we restart rural America after the pandemic? You know, a lot of businesses have been really hit by this, and a lot of rural businesses are you know, marginally profitable to begin with. So you take out several months of revenue, and it's difficult. You know, I don't know about you, but I have not had a haircut in a while. And so think about the Main Street barber who hasn't been cutting hair, or the gas station where nobody's been buying gas, or the little shop. Those places are going to be struggling, and a lot of them may not come back. And so how do we kind of help rural communities recover from that and find other ways, other businesses that might come in after those that do go away? I think a number of them may have been surviving and may find that after the pandemic, their customer base is quite different, because people have gone online. They found that they like shopping online, and so there may be people not coming downtown so much. Maybe they've learned how to do their own haircuts. I tried it. I won't do it again. So how do we get them to recover from that? Longer term, we may see that rural may be more attractive. You think about where the pandemic hit. It hit in the cities, and so maybe people will say, hey, maybe this rural living is better. And so there may be opportunities to have a little bit of a rural renaissance there. And how do we help communities through that? The second topic that I would be interested in is, how do we overcome the current and growing rural agricultural labor shortage, especially through technology. So John Mann and I have been working on a little theme called Smart Implements. A lot of this is about marketing. People are afraid of robots. Robots are going to take over the world. They could have a kind of a similar vibe to how some people have reacted to GMOs. But everybody has a smartphone in their hand these days, and so calling it a smart implement, where it can do these repetitive tasks, would be maybe a way to frame it for the rural population and communities at large. There's a lot of work going on in this area, but it's very disorganized, and there's really nobody looking at the whole thing. And how does it impact agriculture? What are the really promising areas for future development? What's the land grant role in that? A third theme that I would see as possibly emerging would be the rural healthcare shortages. It's not just the barber that people haven't been going to. They haven't been going to their hospitals. People are dying of heart attacks because they're afraid to get the coronavirus when they go to the hospital. A lot of hospitals were already closing before this pandemic hit. And so we may see an acceleration of that process. And so how do we engage with communities to shore up the healthcare system? Is it telemedicine? Is that going to be an improvement, or is it going to make things worse? What are some of the options for rural areas in that area? And then finally, fourth theme might be just the efficiency of the land grant enterprise after the pandemic. We've certainly learned a lot about engaging stakeholders through technology. Some of that may continue afterwards. What are some of the best practices, and how do we continue to engage stakeholders, not just do the one-way delivery through those systems? So just to close then, I think I've got a substantial experience that are relevant to moving into this position and a lifelong interest in rural areas. I have had a wide variety of administrative roles, and so I know how to make things happen as an administrator. And my passion for this position is to really help make life better for thousands of people in the region. So I look forward to interacting with you in the future, and obviously starting now with your reactions and questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. I'm going to open it up for questions. We have a relatively small group, so I think people can speak up, or if you feel more comfortable, there are participants in the lower left, you can raise your hand, and I'm not sure if Robin or Jeff would see that and popped up, but we'll figure out a way to call on you. But some questions for Scott.
Yeah, I've got the participant list here, so you can raise your hand. I can see that.
Maybe I'll start with a question for you then. So you talked about doing a needs assessment. You also talked about the 7 programs that you've currently got going on, and the easiest thing to do with current programs is to continue to do them. So how do you then take the information you get and make adjustments in what the center's doing?
Well, I think programs have their own life. You know, the seven programs I talked about in the proposal really were they were all grant funded proposals and projects that, you know, came through our 4-center one-stop shop model. And so they were grant funded. Agencies put money into the 4 centers. We redistributed that back out to the land grant system. And so they had their life, you know, for sure. And we always were looking for, you know, capacity building in that, so that, you know, for example, the health one that I led, you know, we brought in a whole bunch of new programming into that, you know, it has had residual effects, that people are still using those materials even though the grants have ended. So I think you just, you know, you reassess periodically and you know, figure out where the resources are, where the needs are, and you put your resources to where those resources and needs are.
Other questions? Well, I'll ask you another one then. So particularly being a Twin Cities resident, you know, I can't help but being struck by all that's happening in society around the homicide of George Floyd and how it points out, at least to me, some of the problems we still have with racism, poverty disparity, and tolerance in our society. And those really aren't just urban issues, they're really societal issues. So what kind of a role would you say something like Center for Rural Development playing in as we move forward from this very troubling time?
Well, you know, the community developments folks do a lot with you know, conflict resolution, and so those could be skills that could be brought into this. You know, I think the economic development theme really comes from poverty alleviation lens. You know, it's not just about poverty, but if people don't feel like they don't have opportunity, then it's, you know, it becomes a contentious issue for folks. So that's a longer term. So shorter term, it might be, you know, conflict resolution. Longer term, it might be more on the economic development side of things. And healthcare too. I think, you know, if you look at some of the things that are out there now, it's not just the Floyd George thing. It's if you look at the death rates for, you know, COVID-19, it's disproportionately affecting the minority communities, and you know, that's a source of anger too. So if you can, you know, work to improve the affordability and the availability of healthcare, that could also help in the longer term.
Well, maybe I'll just follow up and sort of, it's a similar question, but ask maybe from a different lens, because some of those healthcare things that you talked about it in your proposal, you know, about addiction, access, and all those things, again, come to this sort of, I'm going to call it a rural urban interface, and how do we make those things fit, communication, some of those things as well. So does that play a role in the decision making about how you think about the needs of a center like this and what you implement?
Well, I think what you're seeing in the healthcare system is consolidation and, you know, purchase of rural healthcare operations by, you know, larger entities that are typically based in urban areas. So they are articulating, they're busily trying to articulate, and so, but at the same time, you know, some of those services may be going away through that articulation process, where, okay, we're not going to have a radiology unit in the rural hospital anymore. It's just going to be kind of taking people in and then sending them to the city for their you know, their reads or whatever. So I think, you know, thinking about how does the system work, and policy around it, so that the whole interests are, you know, they know their interests, and they know kind of what you know, how some of these different structures, you know, may impact the community. You know, it's also taking sort of, in some cases, taking leadership out of the community too. You know, you take that provider out of the community, the provider is more than just a provider. The provider tends to be, you know, the person who sits on the school board and, you know, all these other things. So Greg had a question.
Yeah, Scott, I was just wondering, the $40,000 you allocated to programming in the proposal, how do you see that working? How do you see it distributing? Initially, it doesn't, quite frankly, to me, it doesn't sound like too much.
So let's see, 40,000. So the 40,000 that's travel. And that might be the director. It might also be bringing in mentees to or mentors into, you know, meetings together to do projects together. There's also a subaward line of $35,000 that, you know, we've always done small grants, and so there could be a small grants component. So that comes out of that, or maybe more targeted. You know, this is an emerging need, so we'll entertain proposals along this way, along these lines. You know, the small grants in the past have been very open in terms of their topics, and so I'd like to do a little bit of that, but also maybe some more targeted work around certain themes that emerge through the needs assessment. But again, you know, I hope you don't just look at the NCR CRD budget, because I view that as sort of just the license to hunt. Really, the projects that came through the one-stop shop, 4-center one-stop shop model dwarfed the annual budget. And you know, when I was preparing this, I was talked to the other 3 center directors, and they're all very excited about building that 4-center model back up again. So, you know, this is the 30,000, 35,000 and the 40,000 is just kind of the beginning of funds that would flow out.
Thank you.
So Scott, I'm curious if you could provide a little more detail. This is Marty Draper at Kansas State. Appreciate if you could provide a little more detail about how you intend to accomplish the things that you're aiming for. You've talked about what, but I'd like to know a little bit more about how.
Okay, well, you know, it really it's the same methods that I used the last time I was director, of the networking, going to DC, looking for agency partners, you know, coordinating things, being very engaged with the different stakeholder groups, and, you know, people, you know, listen to their needs and come up with teams to accomplish this. You know, it's a small center. It's, you know, 1.5 professionals, and so you've got to be the person that's the convener and bringing teams together to get things done.
So Scott, this is Hector from the University of Nebraska. So I'm curious about if you can expand a little bit more about, you know, what is your vision or strategy for developing those strategic partnerships? You know, what are the elements are you looking for? You know, there's a wide array of partnerships that can be created, but, you know, a real true partner is in where, you know, both ends benefit from it. So I'm just curious about that, because it's critical, especially for the work that the center will be doing in the rural communities.
Yeah, you know, it comes back to FaceTime. You know, talking to people, understanding where their needs are, looking for, okay, does this line up with the mission of the center or not, or the 4 centers? And, you know, sometimes it might just be a referral. You know, hey, you know, that's not really what we do. I know somebody in Nebraska that does that, and, you know, be happy to, you know, make that connection for you.
And what about engagement from, those type of groups, leadership groups for saying something at the rural side that can take ownership of part of that program or whatever you're trying to enforce and make them, more collaboratively, and talk to their peers, if you will.
So what leaderships are you talking about? Are you talking about outside of the system or inside the land grant system?
Outside of the system, in the communities, yeah.
Okay. So, outside the system, I would be about empowering the land grant professionals to have those conversations. Know those stakeholders better than I do. There would be resources, there's produced webinars, podcasts, those sorts of things about rural trends. But, again, 1.5 people, we can't necessarily go around and meet all the local stakeholder groups and develop those relationships. So we do have to work through the land grant professionals who are there on the ground to do some of those things. Now at the national level, we definitely in the past did that. We had conferences at the National Press Club, engaging policymakers. We did the routine visits to the legislative assistants. I was engaged with the Farm Bill conversations with Senator Stabenow's staff. So those sorts of things would happen at that level. But at the local level, we would rely on our people that are there on the ground. And I think that's better because, I don't know the politics of every state, every locality, and it could be that I'd be stepping in it. And so it's better for people that know those folks better to have those conversations, and they know what can work and how to frame things to make a point.
Anybody have
his hand up again, or maybe Greg Hadley, or maybe not. Maybe he just forgot to take it down. I'm not sure.
other questions?
I just haven't taken it down yet. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
W.W. Barker has his hand up.
Oh, good.
Hey, Scott, and thank you for a really interesting presentation. I was quite intrigued by your point that given the epidemiology of the pandemic, that people might actually find rural areas more appealing now rather than cities. And so what would be the role of the center in driving that out migration?
Well, I think it's more, helping communities recognize that there may be an opportunity, right? And what types of communities might have that opportunity. It might not be that every community has the same opportunity with that. Those sorts of things. And how do you prepare, and what types of living arrangements are people looking for if they are moving out? If we start to see that happening, we don't know, right? But we can be tracking, national census data to be asking the question, is that starting to happen? Or, United Van Lines is a great resource too to, figure out who's moving where, in a more of a real-time situation. A lot of the things I've been doing on the side have to do with big data, and so that's that might be a source too. We did a real fun project on trying to figure out, why the suicide rate varied from one place to the next, and we tapped into Google Trends to figure out, what types of Google searches are associated with a spike in suicide rates. So we've also got some good connections into the FSRDC system. So raise your hand if you know what that is, FSRDC. Okay, so that's a national system that allows researchers to get into all of the federal databases. Starting with the census, but there's other databases that are now becoming available. So you can literally go in and see anything about a business, anything about an individual if the government has information on them. And of course, there's lots of hoops to jump through to get access to that. But one of my former graduate students has, focused on that for his dissertation, really looking at his question at the time was Hispanic entrepreneurship and how do we do a better job of supporting Hispanics to be successful in business. But once he got that system open, it's you can use it for a lot of other things. So we're working on health issues now, and also looking at projects that we call community opportunity mapping, where we use the federal data to see what areas are underserved, and can help kind of identify where businesses might be able to be started. Also looking at what types of situations can support agricultural processing facilities. So, what kind of agriculture needs to be there? What are some of the other components to support agricultural processing in a particular area? So there's a lot of big data sets out there that I think it would be fun to, target to answer some of those questions.
Anyone else? In that case, Scott, I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us for your presentation and doing that. For deans and directors, I want to remind you that there's a Qualtrics survey. We truly are looking for people's input and suggestions as we go into this process. We need that back by the close of business on June 10th. And with that, we're going to end the recorded part of this, and deans and directors can leave the discussion. We're going to turn it over to the capable hands of Dan Rossi and the Technical Review Committee. But thank you all for participating.